Tonight, we are talking about the ethnicity estimate, and I named the program Surprised by Your Ethnicity Estimate because I know a number of people have expressed to me that their ethnicity estimate was not what they expected it to be. And tonight we're going to go through examples and explanations about different people's ethnicity estimates that they have brought to me. And of course, I've anonymized them. I'm not using their real name. I've changed some of the circumstances, but by and large, these are real people that we're talking about here. Now, you might be asking, if you're a beginner, how do you get this ethnicity estimate? Well, you have to order it from one of the following companies. And the test that the ethnicity estimate comes with is called an autosomal DNA test. And it's offered by 4 major companies: Ancestry DNA, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage DNA, and 23andMe. There are 2 specialty companies that I was going to mention. One is called Genie, and it specializes in Asian DNA and doing ethnicity estimates for people of Asian descent. And then Living DNA is mostly specializing in breaking down your British Isles DNA into regions and counties, if possible. All of the companies that I just mentioned, except for Genie, provide a list of DNA matches with your autosomal DNA results. And I personally spend much more of my time looking at my list of DNA matches than I do on my ethnicity estimate. But I know many people are interested in their ethnicity estimate. That's maybe the reason that they decided to take a DNA test in the first place, is because they're curious about what their ethnicity estimate is going to say. So that's why we're going to talk about that tonight. Now, I could spend a whole session talking about how the ethnicity estimate is calculated. I do have some of that information in your handout, so you can look at the handout and see that, but we're basically going to skim right over that in this one slide. So the ethnicity estimate, first thing you want to know is the estimate is the key word. And some of the companies kind of hide that information down on their website, so it's not really front and center. But if you read the fine print, they will tell you that they are estimating to the best of their ability what they think your ethnicity is. So that in itself is a clue to you that this is not precise, it's not exact. You can't expect it to line up with your exact genealogical tree. The companies, furthermore, update their results frequently as new information becomes available. So if you tested 5 years ago, your ethnicity estimate has probably changed since you first got your results. Now, some of you may not have logged back in and looked at your ethnicity estimate. So you might want to do that again if you haven't logged in a while to see how it has changed. All of mine have changed, some of them more than once. And the companies will tell you, they don't exactly tell you what they did to update it. They just say new information has we've identified new ways of doing your ethnicity estimate, and we think this is a better way. It's basically kind of what they say. So they're usually rather vague as to what they did to change it, but you will notice changes have been made. Each company, so remember there were the 4 major companies, each of those companies computes your results slightly differently. And this is because they are different companies. And so they have slightly different ways of doing it. They're all basically doing the same thing, but they have slightly different ways of doing it. They have different database sizes, and they have different composition of who's in their database. So they have different customers. Some people like me have tested at all 4 companies, but other people have only tested at one of the companies. And so there's going to be slight differences like that. And another thing to keep in mind is that your ethnicity estimate is really It's presented to you as if they're talking about modern countries of the world, but what they're really talking about is historical people groups. And so I think they struggle as to how to present your ethnicity results to you without using the names of countries. But you want to kind of ignore the boundaries of current countries, and you want to think more in the idea of history of the area that we're talking about, wherever it is that your people were from, and you want to look at the continent and the regional level. And I think the tests are much more, the ethnicity estimate is much more reliable, giving you continent information and regional information about your DNA, and less reliable about really specific countries. Okay, so this is just an example of a historical map, and you would want to look at different maps from different time periods. And this is European because I'm European in my background, but if you're African background, you want to look at some maps of historical Africa and so forth. This is Europe at the death of Charlemagne in 814. And so this is 814 AD, about 1400 years ago, right? And it's showing you the tribes that lived in different places in Europe. And when we say tribes, we mean that these are kind of nomadic peoples that moved from here to there and back again, based on, you know, whether they can find food, and whether there's illness or disease in a particular place, they'll move out. If the political climate is not good for them, they'll move out. If they run into raiders, they'll move out, they'll move somewhere else. So this is the kind of thing that was happening all over the world before people settled into villages and stayed there, maybe around the Middle Ages, a little bit earlier than that. So you can imagine that if your people were nomadic tribal people, that wherever they moved, they left some of their DNA behind. So this is one reason why our DNA is a tangled, I don't know, what do I want to say? Our DNA is much more diverse than we think it would be. Let's put it that way. Okay, so what types of ethnic surprises have people identified in their ethnicity results? So some people have just seen some slight differences to their known family background. Other people see moderate differences. Sometimes you will see trace results, that's small amounts of another continent's DNA, such as a European person getting a 1% African result or 1% Native American. Sometimes you get major discrepancies from your known background. So you might get a larger percentage of a different continent than you expected. And then another ethnicity surprise would be a person who is non-Jewish who tests as Jewish, or vice versa. What can these surprises mean? Well, that's kind of what we're going to go over tonight. If the differences are very slight, but correct at the continent level, it often is not consequential or even relevant. Moderate differences may need an expert to evaluate them and see whether they are of concern or not. Traces, small amounts of different ethnicities may not be very consequential or relevant. But if you test at a different continent level than expected, then you may have unearthed a family secret, and that would be consequential, I would think, to you and relevant. Now, when I talk about the continent level, I didn't realize that this was a controversial subject, but when I was in school, I learned that there were 7 continents. And so I'm probably dating myself a bit when I say that. And they were these 7 here that are shown. Now, from my understanding, school children today might be being taught different continents. So with that said, I haven't really investigated that very closely, but really what you need to know is how the DNA companies are counting what continents they're using in their testing. So you'd want to read up on this at the help files at the company that you tested at. There may be a category at some of the companies for Middle East and count that kind of as a different continent. Some companies might count Oceania, the Pacific Islands, as its own continent. So there are differences between what the testing companies would use. Now, if you find a surprise, this is my advice to you. Do not panic. You want to look at testing at a different DNA company or uploading your raw DNA to a different DNA company to get another set of ethnicity results to kind of verify what you found or to say, oh, maybe that isn't quite right. You want to look at your match list. Do you have close matches? Do the close matches names look familiar to you? Do you see matches to known family members? Or do your close matches descend from common ancestors of yours and line up with your tree? You might need to test other family members to get to the bottom of your surprise. And you always want to seek expert advice before you jump to any conclusions based solely on your ethnicity results. Okay, now, first of all, I'm going to show you a fun method of calculating your own expected ethnicity. And to do this, I'm assuming that you have a tree and you have researched it. So this is not going to work for someone who's adopted. But those of us who are not adopted, who know who our biological family are, you want to start with your tree. And you can see over on the right-hand side, I have an arrow there. That is your second great-grandparents. And that's what we're going to use. So I'm calling this a quick and dirty method. And what I mean by that is we're not going to spend hours and hours and hours working on this. We're going to quickly assess our second great-grandparents. There's 16 of them. And we're going to assign an ethnicity to them. This is going to be based on our genealogical research, what we know about them. If we don't know much about them, we're going to make an educated guess, maybe based on their last name and how it sounds ethnically wise, or on family story that we might have heard. And then if one of these people was multi-ethnic, you're going to pick an ethnicity for them because I'm only assigning each person one ethnicity. So that's what I mean by dirty. It's by no means precise. It's just a way to quickly get an ethnicity estimate for yourself. So when I do that for my 16 great-great-grandparents, this is what it looks like. I assigned an ethnicity to all of them. And these are ethnicities that a lot of the DNA companies use. So, and because there's 16 of them, your answers are going to be in fractions of sixteenths. So I have 5/16 English. I'm a quarter Slovene or Eastern European. I'm 3/16 Scots-Irish. I'm 3/16 German. And I do have one relative that I don't know anything about. And so I just call him unknown European. And then you want to convert those fractions into percentages. And I have to say that I had to Google this because I'm not good with math, but Google helped me, it figured it out for me. And so that translates into 31% English, 25% Slovene, 18% Scots-Irish, 18% German, and 6% unknown European. So that's the quick and dirty method. And you can do this with your own pretty quickly. Now there's a longer, more involved method, and this is mentioned in your handout. So you don't have to run and copy down this URL if you don't want to, just get it out of the handout. It's from Roberta Estes' blog that she wrote on January 11th, 2017, and it's called Concepts Calculating Ethnicity Percentages. And she goes into a longer, more involved way of calculating your own ethnicity estimate. Okay, so now we're going to go into the examples part of our program tonight, and we're going to talk about different people's surprise ethnicity results. But before we do that, you want to start, like I said, kind of researching the area where your family was from and by the continent level. So this is a current map of Europe. And remember, I'm looking at this because I believe 100% European. So I need to know this. And so the current map of Europe is telling me what countries are there now and what the borders are, and what countries border on those countries. And remember, this is where you also want to look at the historical maps that are showing the people groups that were passing through as different geographical areas at different times. You also want to know about regions of Europe or regions of whatever part of the world that you're from, because the DNA testing companies are going to use these regions, and it might confuse you. So if you ever get an ethnicity estimate result that has a ethnicity in it that you don't know where that is located, what it refers to, you want to Google it, or you want to do a search on that and try to find out what it means. But I've put some common regional labels up here on this map. So if you get Scandinavia as a result, that's up in Northern Europe there where Sweden and Norway are located. The Baltics is over on the Baltic Sea there, and it usually refers to the modern day countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, but it's probably more than that. British Isles, of course, is England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. The Iberian Peninsula is down in southern Europe, and it includes Spain and Portugal, and probably a little more of France, perhaps. And the Balkans is down in southeastern Europe, and it includes, it has various descriptions. Sometimes it includes Greece, sometimes it includes Macedonia, Bulgaria, and the former Yugoslavian countries of like Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, etc. But you want to read the help files of the company that you tested with to gain understanding of what different regional labels that they are going to use, because each of the 4 companies is going to use slightly different labels. Okay, so our first example is when you see slight differences to your known family tree, but your ethnicity estimate is correct at the continent level. And this is going to be me. So we're going to look all over Sarah's DNA here. And we're going to look at all 4 companies. So I put up over on the left, again, this is the quick and dirty ethnicity that I calculated up a few minutes ago. You watched me do. And on the right is my ethnicity result that I got from Ancestry DNA. And basically, it looks like what I have on the left. The percentages are different, but don't worry yourself about the percentages so much. But if the actual correct ethnicities are listed, or the correct regions of Europe are listed, then you're doing pretty well. You'll notice that my Eastern European is a little low. It says 11% instead of 25%. And we'll keep an eye on that. We'll go on to the next company, which is 23andMe. 23andMe is the only company that does not list me as 100% European. And we're going to talk about that a little later. Right now, we've got 99% European. And again, I'm pretty much the right groups. I'm Eastern European, British and Irish, and French and German, which is basically what I thought I should be. Again, my Eastern European numbers are lower than what they should be, according to what I estimated. Family tree DNA. So family tree DNA, again, really has the right countries listed as far as I'm concerned. I think Germany is probably what is listed as Central Europe there. And family tree DNA is calling me Baltic, which is that area that I told you was Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania area. I don't know why they have me as Baltic. That is an Eastern European group. So there may be more about my Eastern Europeans that I don't know. And then we have my heritage, the final one. And again, the regions and the areas are pretty much right. Now, my heritage has got me as a larger percent Scandinavian, and they have me as Baltic and Finnish as well. Now, I'm going to tell you at this point in time that this is my opinion. But if I were to rank the 4 companies and how I feel that they do with the ethnicity estimates, I would say 23andMe and Ancestry are neck and neck for first and second. My heritage is normally, I just hear a lot of anecdotal evidence from people saying that they're my heritage. Ethnicity estimate is the most incorrect of all of theirs. So every once in a while, I don't know what's going on with that. I know my heritage has been in the business for a shorter amount of time than some of the other companies. And so they may just be working out some kinks in their ethnicity estimates. But so I'm not really going to worry about the Baltic and the Finnish and the Scandinavian here. In general, this again is mostly correct. Now, like I said, we have noticed that my Eastern European DNA came in at a lower percentage than expected. This could be because fewer Eastern European people have tested. It could also be because some of my ancestors may have moved to Slovenia from a bordering Germanic area. There were Germanic areas to the north of Slovenia. We looked at a map of the world, and to the west of Slovenia. So it's very possible that some Germanic people moved in there, intermarried with my Slovenian, and that's why I'm more Germanic than Slovenian, perhaps. And then it may just be a DNA company shortcoming that they're not somehow detecting my Eastern European DNA correctly. I could have my tree wrong. Like I said, I don't know. I mean, it could just be that some Germanic people had mixed into my family there and I didn't realize it. So I could do more genealogical research. The Slovenian records have recently come online on Matricula, and that's a free website where you can do research into the church records of Eastern and Central European countries. And so I'm going to be doing more research on my Slovenian ancestors. Maybe I'll get some answers there. And maybe some testing company updates will help as well, as the testing companies kind of work out their kinks. So my conclusion is that my DNA is showing slight variations among European ethnicities, but at the continent level, it is correct, and it contains the correct regional groups also. All four of the testing companies more or less agree. And therefore, I think my ethnicity estimate is well within the range of what it should be. And I'm not, I don't consider myself to have found any kind of smoking gun here. I think it's pretty much lining up with what it should. Okay, now Barney is someone that I know who I met here at the library, and he told me that he had taken the Ancestry DNA test, and he expected that his ethnicity would be 100% German. And he based this on the fact that his family had all immigrated here, his mother's side and his father's side, from Germany in the last 100 to 200 years, and had moved to the Fort Wayne area. And so he wanted his ethnicity estimate to look like the estimate there on the right of the screen. He wanted to say 100% Germanic. Well, what he actually got when he got his ethnicity estimate back was this. He got Germanic, yes. He also got French. And let me just say that Barney was exercised over this. He gave me a whole lecture on it. And in the course of that, he told me where his family was from in Germany, in the German countries, basically, because Germany itself did not really become a country until the late 1800s. Before that, it was a number of German states with Germanic peoples in them. So his family was from Alsace-Lorraine. This is an area of Europe. And historically, this region changed hands frequently between the French and Germanic governments. So if you just Google Alsace-Lorraine, you'll find this out. Residents of this area were mixed. Some of them were French background, some of them were Germanic background, and some of them were probably from other ethnicities altogether. So what does that mean? That means that the DNA of the residents from this region would be mixed. There would be some French DNA, there'd be some Germanic DNA, there'd be other things probably going on as well. So was I surprised by Barney's result? No. I explained this to him. I showed him on the map. Here's a map of Europe again, and I have highlighted with the red arrow where Alsace-Lorraine is. And this is a modern day map. And Alsace-Lorraine currently is mostly in France, if not all the way in France. But you can see it's bordered by Germany, by Belgium, by Luxembourg, by Switzerland, and by France. And here's a historical map of the region. And you can see again, it's there by Bavaria, Baden in Germany, Switzerland down at the bottom, and Nancy, I might be pronouncing that really wrong, but Nancy, France is there, and Moselle. I have terrible French pronunciation, please forgive me. But anyways, this is the area we're talking about. So my suggestion for Barney at that time was that he tested a different testing company, and I suggested 23andMe because they are very highly reputable. And look at his results there. And he did this, and his results were similar. He still got French ethnicity as well as German. I told him to look at his DNA match list. I said, do you recognize the names of your matches that are from both father's and mother's side? Yes, he said. He had matches to both his father's side and his mother's side. Did he have any unknown close matches that he could not connect to his known family? No, he did not. So that would indicate that he was not adopted, that he did not have a problem in his tree. His tree seemed to be correct. His ethnicity seemed to be correct. So the conclusion was that Barney's results are in line with the region of Europe that his ancestors came from and are not a cause for concern. I don't think I actually convinced him of that, but that is my conclusion. That's what I told him. Okay, so those were both slight differences from your expected ethnicity report. Now, how about a moderate difference? So moderate differences are a little bit harder to characterize. So I can't really say, as a blanket rule, what is going on. If your DNA, it really depends on the situation. So you would almost have to have somebody look over your DNA and tell you what they think. But you want to be sure that you're looking at your match list and seeing if you have matches to both your father and your mother's side. Do you have unknown high-level matches? Remember that ancestry DNA's genetic communities are accurate and can lead you to ethnicity surprises. And have a DNA expert look at it if you have questions. So John's story. So John is Chinese American, and he's kind of similar to Barney in that he expected his ethnicity estimate to be totally Chinese, 100%. His parents had immigrated here, but they had both lived in a small village in China. And they both had written, I believe he told me they were written family genealogies that went back 24 generations in that same village or in, a neighboring village, some type thing. They did not set foot anywhere else in China, much less anywhere else in the world, according to his family genealogy that he had. And so he thought his ethnicity estimate would reflect that. He thought it would say, 100% Chinese. But when it came back, he also tested at Ancestry, and he got a result that looked something like this. East Asian, 95%, Polynesian, 5%. And he believed vehemently that the Polynesian DNA was an error. And at the time that he took the test, Ancestry was not yet giving results that said Chinese. So this was a couple years ago. I think they have changed that now. But at the time that John took the test, they were giving the result of East Asian for someone from China. And so he was happy with the East Asian result. He was unhappy with the Polynesian result. And let's look at our map again and look at our continents. So the red arrow over on the right is pointing at China, and China actually covers a large portion of Asia there. It's on the coast. You can see it does border on the Pacific Ocean. China does. And then Polynesia is kind of south and east of there. And it's off their islands in the Pacific Ocean. And they're kind of closer to Australia than they are to Asia. And here's another map kind of zeroing in on Polynesia. and showing you that China is over there at the top. Now, this is the first time that I'd ever been called upon to look at somebody's Asian DNA and try to make sense of it. And I have to say right now that this is still not an area of expertise for me. So I gave John my thoughts and I told him, I said, I'm not an expert on this. I said, you need to, if you really have, these concerns, I said, I would call Ancestry and talk to them and ask to speak to somebody who knows something about Asian DNA or how Ancestry is counting the Asian DNA. So my thoughts are there are questions about where to count Polynesia at the continent level. Would it be counted as Asia? Would it be counted as Australia? Or would it be counted as a separate Oceania group? Those are legitimate questions. And each testing company might count it a little differently. I do know that fewer persons from Asia and Polynesia have tested in these American testing companies. So there's not a lot of people in China proper right now or in Polynesia proper right now who are taking these DNA tests at our companies. So there would be a smaller sample size to compare John's DNA with and a smaller reference population. And then my thought was, could the Polynesian and the Chinese ethnic groups be related far back in time? And maybe that's what the test is kind of picking up on. And so I suggested he did need to check with the testing company. In this case, it was Ancestry, about how they classify Polynesian DNA and read their help files. So what you can do at each of these testing companies, whenever you want to learn about the ethnicity that you've been assigned, you can click on it. So on John's results, he had the words East Asian. And so when we clicked on it, we got this screen. And this is from a screen that we got like 3 years ago. So this is 2017 or 18 that we did this. And I think that they have changed their labels since then, and they've changed their screens. So you wouldn't get this today if you were looking at this today. So this, I'm showing you some historical screenshots that we did from a couple years ago. So it told us that it showed us a map here, and it showed us what Ancestry was classifying as Asia. And it gave us people in this DNA group may identify as Russian, Chinese, North Korean, South Korean, etc. And it goes on and on and on. It does not mention Polynesian on there. And then we go over here and we click on Polynesia, and it shows us that the Ancestry is counting Polynesia as those Pacific Island countries, and it gives the examples of Tonga and Samoa. Then, if you wanted to learn further about Polynesia, because I wanted to get to the bottom of where they thought that the Polynesian peoples came from before they went off to the Polynesian islands. And that was in the origins section of that same Polynesian section at Ancestry at the time. And basically, it says that their origins may have been in modern day Taiwan. Well, Taiwan is an island located right off China's mainland and is ethnically related to China. So this said to me that maybe his Polynesian DNA is pointing to the ancient DNA of John's and not more recent DNA. But I don't know that. That's just a speculative theory that I came up with. So I suggested that John take another test. He'd already tested an Ancestry. I thought he should take 23andMe. I also thought he should check his match list. Again, does he have known matches to both his mother and his father's family? Does he have close matches that do not seem to be linked to his known family? And I think John probably, I haven't seen John lately, so I do not know if his ethnicity results have updated in the meantime. They may have, and this whole situation might have resolved itself. I think when the testing companies get more precise with their Asian and Polynesian DNA, that this may have resolved itself. And I'd be interested to hear from John and if he has any updates to his situation. So in this case, I don't think he found a surprise where he's actually Polynesian. I think it's more of a testing company anomaly kind of thing, where they don't have enough data and they they're not able to really predict very well those ethnicities. But that, like I said, is my guess. Okay, then we have Genie. Now, Genie is a whole different story. So Genie expected that her ethnicity estimate would be 25% English, 50% German, and 25% Italian. So she has her tree. She's researched her tree, and this is what she expects it. This is what she's found based on her research that she's done. So imagine her surprise when she gets her DNA done at Ancestry DNA, and she gets this result. So she gets Eastern European and Russian, Ireland, and then a tiny bit of Sweden and Germanic Europe. Now, this really doesn't jive with what she thought her ethnicity was at all. And the arrows where I have put the blue arrows on the ethnicity estimate, those are subdivisions of the major groups. So the first group that she has is Eastern European and Russia, 49%. And then she has, these are called genetic communities, and these are particular to Ancestry DNA. And they are very reliable. So she has several subdivisions of Eastern European and Russia. She has, the first one is Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and Lithuania. And then she has specific places in, I think these are specific places in modern day Poland. And I'm not going to try to pronounce them. The first one begins with an M, and then the next one is called Lesser Poland. Okay, then her next DNA ethnicity is Ireland, and she has 40% from Ireland. And then she has a subdivision, Connaught, Ireland. That's a province of Ireland, is what my colleague John told me today. And then she has further subdivisions of geographic locations of Mayo, South Mayo, Southwest Mayo, South and Central Mayo, and North Connaught. So these are different kind of discrete locations in Ireland. And these genetic communities are very, they're not really, what's the word I want? They're very accurate. So this is not really in doubt here. She is definitely from Poland, and she is definitely from Ireland, according to this result. It's not questionable. So what does that mean? Well, the analysis is really that her ethnicity is correct at the continent level. She did test as all European, right? But her genetic communities do not coincide with her family tree research. None of her known family comes from Poland or Ireland. These genetic communities from Ancestry are remarkably accurate because there's a lot of science that goes into this, and I cannot say I understand all the science, but you can read about it on the Ancestry website. They will tell you exactly how they have formulated these genetic communities. It's based on their analysis of Genie's family tree, or Genie's DNA, but they are also based on Genie's shared matches. So the people that she matches with on the match list are also from Ireland and Poland. And so she has such a large percentage of matches from those places that there's really no other explanation that she has to also be from those places. So she has uncovered some kind of family secret because her DNA does not match her known tree at all. She appears to have no Italian DNA. She appears to have a recent Eastern European ancestor from southern Poland. She appears to have a recent Irish ancestor from Mayo Connaught area. And given all the differences in her known family tree, I would consider that there's an unknown adoption somewhere as a possible answer. But for her to get to the bottom of this, she really needs to test her parents and her siblings if she has any, if that's possible. If not, she could test cousins on each side of the family, or aunts or uncles. talk to family members about this if possible. Now, sometimes, you know that your family would not be receptive to those kinds of questions. So you want to be sensitive. She could probably figure this out without her family's help if necessary. And that would be through reviewing the DNA match list, looking for clues. And I have a whole talk about that. That's on our library YouTube channel. It's about finding unknown parentage through DNA. And she needs to probably talk to a DNA expert. All right, now let's talk about trace amounts of DNA. So remember, the trace amounts are the small percentages. So trace amounts are around 1% or less of an ethnicity. And experts, if you talk to different people, they will tell you, some of them will tell you these are not significant. These are insignificant, that you should pay no attention to them. And other people would tell you that these are possible to figure out. And so I'm going to give you my opinion. This is just my 2 cents worth. You can take it or leave it. If it's the same continent as you expected, such as like I had that 1% Finnish, I think, or if somebody has 1% Swedish and they're a European person or the European background, I would suggest it's not consequential. I wouldn't go looking for a Swedish ancestor in my background just because I had 1% Swedish or 1% Finnish. Now, if you had 1% or more of a different continent's DNA than expected, it could be consequential, and you may be able to determine where it came from. And then 23andMe does a really good job at looking at trace or small amounts of DNA. And so they're going to be a little more reliable than other companies on this topic. So we're going to look at my own trace amounts, and mine are less than 1%. So they're very small. It's just kind of a smidgen of my DNA is from another continent. So the only company that reported these are 23andMe. And if you recall, I was 99.2% European, which means that I'm 0.8% something else, not European, according to 23andMe. And so 23andMe has suggested that I'm North African and West African, and you can see the amounts there. Now, there's a big explanation here. You click on it at 23andMe, and this will come up, and it will tell you all about 23andMe and how they calculate your trace ancestry and how you can verify it or not. And I'm going to summarize it on the next page here. So basically, they tell you that they analyze each segment of DNA for ethnicity, and the other companies do not do this. They do more of, other companies look at your whole chromosome, like you have 22 pairs of chromosomes. And so the other companies would look at chromosome 1, and they would kind of make a determination that chromosome 1 is this ethnicity. 23andMe, it goes segment by segment on chromosome 1. And you have the 2 copies of chromosome 1 from father and one from mother. And so 23andMe is the only one that really does that. And they would claim that it makes their results more accurate. They also provide you with a chromosome painter, which means that you can see the ethnicity associated with the segments on each of the numbered chromosomes. They provide a confidence tool that you can adjust. And I'll show you that in a minute. And they also allow you to see the ethnicity results of your relatives who are also tested at 23andMe, if the relative agrees to share information with you. So this is what the chromosome painting on 23andMe looks like. So I went to the chromosome painting tool at 23andMe. And at the very top there is the confidence level adjuster. So you can be 50%, which is speculative, all the way up to 90%, which is conservative. And so I have it set as conservative, meaning that I don't want them to be speculative with my DNA ethnicity results. I want them to be conservative. And this is what my conservative results look like. And you can see it's not very specific. However, my trace ancestry, 0.3% of my North African is still showing. even though I asked it to be very conservative in its estimation. And I don't know if you can see it, but everything is color coded. So the North African DNA is color coded in the purple. And I have put a big red arrow next to it. And so it is showing up on chromosome 6, kind of at the beginning there. And you can see I have 2 copies of chromosome 6. One is going to be from mother, one is going to be from father. This diagram does not show me which one is from father and which one is from mother. I have to figure that out myself. And one way to do that is because I have other family members tested at 23andMe. I can look at my father's DNA. I can look at my mother's DNA. So when I look at my mother's DNA, I see the same segment. So this is my mom's chromosome painting at 23andMe. And again, I have set the confidence level to 90%, which is conservative. And she also has North African DNA. It is also on chromosome 6 in that same basic location. So what I have learned from this is that I got that segment of DNA from my mother. So we may have a distant, now this is very distant, North African ancestor. My mother has the same segment, confidence level is high. My mother's family tree is half from New England and half from the South in the US. And both sides could have owned slaves at one point or another. But I know my grandfather's Southern family did in fact own slaves, and it seems to be a likely source of this African DNA. That would be my guess. I do not know. My next step, if I wanted to pursue this, would be to test family members on my mother's side and my mother's father's side at 23andMe and search for others with that same segment of North African DNA. But knowing that it is probably too far back in the tree for us to identify with certainty, I would say it's at least 7 and possibly 10, 12 generations back that this DNA is coming from. And I don't intend to spend a lot of time and effort on this, as I have other family mysteries to work on. Roberta Estes' blog does have some examples of her work with trace ethnicities. She has done more work on this, and she has had some success. So it's just your own preference, your own how you want to spend your time. I think it's kind of a wild goose chase for me. It is very intriguing, but it's probably a wild goose chase for me to try to pursue this. Now, what if you have a little bit more of a trace amount? So how about 1 to 2% of a different continent than expected? So Alice is somebody that I actually know, and I've worked with her on this a little bit. So Alice was Caucasian and expected her ethnicity result to be 100% European, right? Well, when she got her ancestry DNA test back, she tested as 1% from Africa. And it says Cameroon, Congo, and Southern Bantu peoples. Now, normally this may be such a small amount that it's untraceable, possibly noise or inaccurate. So Alice, was inclined not to really look into it, but then she did. And she found out that she has DNA matches on her DNA match list to multiple persons of an African American background. And so that's useful. That might help her figure this out. And she also, by looking at the trees of those people, and some of them, I think she wrote to them, maybe she messaged them on the Ancestry platform, and she found out that many of these matches are descended from the same African American family. So she's pinpointed what family it is that she's possibly related to. And and some of her matches are kind of high, 47 centimorgans, which could be a third cousin-ish. And they're all descendants of the free Black Dungy family who came from Virginia and were freed slaves from Virginia. They moved on to Ohio and Southern Michigan. And she put together this tree, which may or may not come across very well. I'm sorry, it looks it's a little blurry. But she's diagrammed all of her DNA matches and shown them coming down from different Dungy children. So there's the pink color as one Dungy child, and the yellow color is another, and the blue are two different Dungy children as well. So all coming from the same Richard Dungy and Nancy Penn. Now, Alice, and this is what I suggested to her, she could start testing different family members on both sides of her family to narrow down where the African DNA might have come from. And she has narrowed it down by testing her father and some other relatives that it's on her paternal grandmother's side of the family. And the mother of that grandmother was very mysterious, and her line has not been traced. She kind of shows up and gets married to the great grandfather, but they can't find her before her marriage. They don't know where she was. They don't know who her parents were. So she's very mysterious. The great grandfather was of known German ancestry, and Alice has many DNA matches that confirm this. So she doesn't think it's through him. She thinks right now the signs are pointing to this African DNA being from the mysterious great grandmother. Now, Alice may be able to figure this out. This is more recent in her family tree, and she's well on her way. So she would have to continue working her matches and doing traditional genealogical research to try to figure out how great grandmother is connecting to these people. But this is really exciting, and we might get the answer one day. So if we do, I will update you all because I think it's very interesting. Okay, now we got to move on here. What if you have a large percentage of a different continent's DNA? This is surely a indication of a big surprise, right? So Ethan is somebody else that I have met in the course of my work. And he came into the library and was talking to me about this. And he had an expected ethnicity of this: 50% British Isles, 25% German, and 25% Filipino. His paternal grandfather was fully Filipino from the Philippines and had immigrated to the US. So Ethan expected his ethnicity estimate to look like this: Philippines, 25%. And, some combination of British and German. But instead, his ethnicity estimate looked like this. Instead of Filipino, he had a whole different ethnicity in there: Native American, Zacatecas, and Aguas Calientes. And those are regions or areas of Mexico. So it still looks like the British Isles and the German is tracking pretty good, but the Filipinos nowhere to be found. Now, let's refresh ourselves on the continents again, just to be sure that we know where these places are located. I put in a red arrow where Mexico is located in North America, obviously. And then the Philippines is an island in the Pacific Ocean, and it is definitely considered part of Asia in all of the testing companies. And the blue arrow is pointing to where the Philippines are. So these are not the same ethnicity. Ethan has tested as a completely different ethnicity at the continent level. So this indicates a surprise, a possible family secret. And the possible answer, and this is just a speculation, is that the man that was supposed to be the 100% Filipino grandfather was either adopted himself or was not the biological grandpa of Ethan's father, or father of Ethan's father, or was switched to the hospital with another child. Now, that's unlikely, but I had to put it in there because it is another explanation, however far-fetched. Biological grandpa appears to have been approximately 100% Native American, since Ethan inherited 25%. Ethan has no DNA matches to persons who are Filipino, and instead he has numerous unknown matches to persons with Mexican origins. So his match list is also reflecting what his ethnicity estimate has told us, that he's not Filipino, but he appears to have Hispanic and Mexican origins. So again, the suggestions for going forward is to test more relatives, including Ethan's dad, his grandma, and his dad's siblings. And, I put a question mark after this one because this would obviously be a touchy subject, but is there a trusted family member who could broach the topic with grandma and say, is there something you want to tell us, grandma? I don't know if that's possible or not. And then Ethan could view the trees of the close level DNA matches that appear to be from Mexican origins to try to determine the biological grandpa's identity. And he could do that by just working with the matches. That is entirely possible. And I'd love to hear an update on Ethan's situation. I have not seen him since that day that we talked about this. So I don't know what he's found out. Okay, then there is Jewish surprises. So basically, Jewish ethnicity is very distinctive from the other ethnicities in the testing. So if you test as Jewish or as partly Jewish, then you are indeed partly Jewish. It's not really questionable. This is not one of the questionable parts of the ethnicity estimate. So an expected 100% non-Jewish person who tests as Jewish has found a family secret. And an expected 100% Jewish person who tests as non-Jewish has found a family secret as well. So here's just an example. We've got a guy named Sean. He's expecting himself to be 50% Irish and 50% Polish. And so his ethnicity estimate would look something like this, Polish and Irish. But instead, he gets this ethnicity estimate. And it's basically showing that instead of being Polish, he is Jewish and Irish. So again, Sean has discovered a family secret, and he should consider that there's an unknown adoption in his family, or that his known father may not have been his biological father. He should test his parents and siblings if possible, and other cousins, aunts, uncles, if not possible. And view the trees of his high-level Jewish ethnicity matches to try to determine his connections to them. Okay, conclusion. This is the same slide that I showed earlier. Do not panic if you get an unexpected ethnicity estimate. Test or upload to other DNA companies to see if you get the same result. Look at your autosomal DNA match list and kind of try to see what's going on there. Are you matching with people that you recognize? Do you match up with common ancestors and so forth? Test your other family members depending on the situation. And always seek expert advice before jumping to any conclusions based solely on your ethnicity results. I thought this would be the last slide, but in the last day or two new things have happened on the ethnic DNA front. Ancestry has announced that they are going to be releasing a new ethnicity estimate in September. So that's this month, sometime your Ancestry ethnicity estimate is probably going to change. Also, Family Tree DNA has just released a new chromosome painter. So just like that 23andMe chromosome painter that I showed you earlier, where it showed my different ethnicity on the chromosome, now you can see the same sort of thing for your family tree matches. So that's something to look forward to.